They stood at the edge of town, where the dust met dusk and the law barely reached. He didn't know her name, not really. She didn't know his story, not yet. But in less than an hour, they'd be husband and wife. It started the way things often did in the West, quiet, grim, and sudden. Emmett Cole hadn't planned to speak that day, let alone get married. He was a man of few words and fewer attachments. A former gunslinger turned ranch hand. He spent his days breaking horses and his nights nursing silence in an empty cabin outside Baxter Creek. Folks said he was running from something. Emmett knew better, he was running from himself. But that afternoon, as he rode into town for kerosene and tobacco, he saw her, a young woman standing in front of the sheriff's office, hands cuffed, face bruised, jaw tight with defiance. The crowd around her muttered words like thief, liar, runaway. Sheriff Mallory barked something about a scheduled hanging. Said the law was clear, no papers, no man to vouch for her, and no kin. She was property of the railroad now, whatever that meant. She didn't beg, didn't cry. She stood there like a flame, refusing to go out in the wind. That's when Emmett did something he hadn't done in a long time. He spoke. "I'll marry her." The words came out low, but sharp enough to split the silence. Every head turned. Even the sheriff raised an eyebrow. The woman stared at him, searching for a joke on his face. There wasn't one. Mallory spat. "You serious, Cole? You don't even know her." "I don't need to." The sheriff scoffed. "You sure you want to saddle yourself with a mystery and a mouthful of trouble?" Emmett dismounted slowly, removed his hat. Been living with worse. And just like that, the girl with no name became Mrs. Cole. They were married in the back room of the general store, with a traveling preacher and 2 half-sober witnesses. Emmett didn't touch her hand, didn't say anything beyond the words required. She gave her name, Clara, and little else. But something in her eyes told him there was more behind that bruised face than a criminal record. Later that night, in his cabin, she asked him, "Why did you do it?" He shrugged. "Didn't like how they looked at you." She sat by the hearth, warming her fingers. "You saved my life." He glanced at her. "Maybe," she looked down. "I don't even know how to say thank you." "You don't have to," he said, then paused. "But you can tell me the truth. When you're ready." She didn't answer, just pulled the quilt tighter and stared at the flames, her eyes wet but stubborn. Outside, the cold night pressed against the windows. Inside, something wordless settled. Between them, an understanding, or maybe a beginning neither of them asked for. But sometimes, out in the wild silence of the West, 2 broken souls find each other, not out of love, but out of necessity, and sometimes that's enough to light the first fire. The first night passed like a quiet truce. Clara didn't speak much. She sat close to the fire, her hands never quite still, like she didn't know what to do now that the running had stopped. Emmett, for his part, didn't press. He poured her a cup of strong coffee, nodded toward the wash basin, then settled into the armchair by the window, like he'd done every night for years. He wasn't sure what made him do it, marry a woman he didn't know, vouch for someone who might have been trouble. But when he'd looked in her eyes that day, it wasn't guilt or shame he sought, was survival. And something about that felt familiar. In the morning, he went out early, tending to the horses and chopping wood. When he returned, she had folded the quilt, swept the hearth, and boiled water for more coffee. No words were exchanged, just a quiet nod between them, like they were both learning the shape of a life that hadn't been planned. That evening, she broke the silence. "You don't ask much, do you?" He looked up from the saddle he was mending. "Folks talk too much these days." She smirked faintly. "You ever think maybe you should have let me hang?" Emmett's eyes narrowed. "You don't strike me as someone who wants to die." Clara didn't answer right away. She stared into the flames, like they were holding her story hostage. "I stole something," she said finally. "Not money, not a horse. Something worse." Emmett didn't flinch. "You kill someone?" "No." "Then, I don't care," he said flatly. "Not unless they're coming here." She looked at him, surprised. "That simple?" He shrugged. "We all done things we ain't proud of. I don't sleep next to a saint. I sleep next to someone who ain't in the cold." Silence stretched between them again, but this time, it wasn't empty. It was filling with something slow, fragile understanding. She whispered. "You remind me of someone I used to know." He didn't ask who, didn't need to. In the West, everybody was haunted by someone. That night, as she turned in on the cot near the fire, Emmett offered her something he hadn't given anyone in years. "My brother used to say we were born under hard skies," he said softly, voice gravelly with memory. "I guess we just learned to live with the storms." She stared at the ceiling, then whispered, maybe that's why I ran. Tired of storms. He nodded, though she couldn't see it. Sometimes running's the only way you survive long enough to stop. In the corner of the room, the fire popped gently. Outside, snowflakes began to drift down, quiet as secrets. Inside, something began to thaw. They were still strangers. But now they shared a roof, a name, and just maybe, a chance neither of them had expected. Ever felt two strangers could understand each other without saying much? That's the kind of silence this story is made of. If Clara's words touched something in you, leave a thought below. 3 days passed, like falling leaves, quiet, slow, and strangely calm. Clara began to move through the cabin like someone, rearranging shadows, soft footsteps, careful hands, eyes always scanning the windows. She never touched Emmett's things, never asked questions. But she folded his shirts when he left them by the basin and stirred the stew. When he forgot to eat, it was a rhythm they never spoke of, but one that built itself. On the 4th morning, just as dawn cracked open the sky with pale light, Emmett stepped outside and saw something that made him freeze mid-dash. Stepped up bootprints, fresh, heading straight toward the barn. He followed them, slow and silent. His hand rested on the revolver still strapped to his hip, not because he expected a fight, but because life had taught him it was better to be ready than sorry. Inside the barn, the horses were restless, and at the far end, leaning against a post like he belonged there, was a man in a bent brown hat, tall, wiry mustache graying at the edges. His coat was torn at the sleeve, and his boots were caked in red, clean, the kind that came from Baxter Creek soil. Emmett kept his voice even. You lost, friend. The man didn't flinch, just turned slightly, revealing a scar that curled down his cheek like a faded question mark. Looking for someone, he said. Red-haired girl. Maybe traveling under a different name now. Emmett didn't blink. Can't help you. The man smiled, slow and snake-like. Town said she might have been seen with you. They'd be wrong. The stranger stepped forward just once. Not enough to provoke, just enough to stake claim to the air between them. You sure you want to lie for a woman who brings fire wherever she runs? Emmett's jaw clenched, but his voice stayed low. I don't lie. Not even for my wife. That word, wife, made the man pause. A flicker of surprise, then something darker crossed his face. She's not what she seems, he said. She's got blood on her hands, and folks look in too. Balanced the scale. I don't care about her past, Emmett said flatly, but I care about mine, and I've seen what men like you do when they think the world owes them something. The man tilted his head. You planning to keep her? Emmett stared him down. I married her. That means something out here. A tense silence stretched, held taut by the cold morning air. Finally, the man backed up a step, touched the brim of his hat. Reckon I'll be back. When the snow clears. Emmett didn't say a word. He waited until the man was a shadow down the trail, then turned toward the cabin. Inside, Clara stood by the window, pale and shaking. She'd seen it all. She didn't say, I told you so. Didn't cry or beg or explain. She just whispered, his name's Silas. And if he's here, it means I don't have much time. Emmett didn't ask questions, didn't press. He just walked over, reached for the old shotgun above the mantel, and handed it to her. Then, I guess it's time you told me the whole story. The fire burned low that night, throwing long shadows on the cabin walls. Emmett sat in his usual chair, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the flames. Clara stood a few feet away, holding the shotgun like it was heavier than her past. Maybe it was. She didn't speak at first. Just stared into the fire, like she was waiting for the right part of herself to wake up and tell the truth. Finally, in a voice soft and hoarse, she said, I was married once. Emmett didn't look up, just waited. His name was Thomas. We met in Kansas, near a cattle post. He was kind, real kind, at first. Her hands tightened around the gun. But kind men don't always stay kind when the crops fail, when the money dries up, when the bottle becomes the only thing keeping them warm at night. She glanced at Emmett, almost embarrassed. He never hit me, not really. Just ... scared me. Told me I was nothing without him, that no one would care if I vanished. She swallowed hard. Then one day, he went after my little sister. Said she smiled at the store clerk too long. She was just 13. Clara's voice cracked, but she didn't stop. I tried to stop him. I grabbed the fire iron, swung without thinking. She looked down at her hands. I didn't kill him, but I hurt him enough that he made sure the story got twisted. Said I attacked him for money. That I was running off with some man. Clara's lip curled. That's how men like him work. They don't kill you, they convince the world you're already guilty. Silence settled in again, heavy and unflinching. Then she said something that knocked the breath from the room. Silas is his brother. Emmett looked up. He came after me, after the trial. Said I ruined their family name. I ran, changed my name, took odd jobs, washed floors, slept in barns. Then he caught up to me in Baxter Creek. She looked at Emmett, eyes wide and wet. I didn't ask you to marry me. I never wanted to drag anyone into this. But you stepped in anyway. Why? Emmett stood slowly, walked over, took the shotgun gently from her hands, and leaned it back over the mantel. Because I've been where you are, he said. Not the same story. But I've lived with ghosts that wouldn't leave. And I know what it's like to have nobody believe you. He paused, eyes locking on hers. You don't owe me your past, Clara. But you're under my roof now. And I don't let trouble take what's mine. Clara blinked at that. Yours. He nodded. You wear my name now. That means something to me. Even if it didn't start with love, it starts with honor. She sat down slowly by the fire, for the first time letting her shoulders fall. Do you believe me? I don't have to, he said. I just know you're not lying. Outside, the wind howled over the plains like it carried the memory of 100 broken promises. But inside that cabin, for the first time in what felt like years, Clara didn't feel like prey. She felt seen. And that, that was the beginning of something more powerful than safety. It was the beginning of trust. The days that followed were quieter than they had any right to be. Clara took to the porch in the mornings, wrapped in Emmett's old wool coat, sipping coffee like she was learning how to breathe again. She didn't flinch at creaking floorboards anymore, didn't glance at every shadow. Sometimes, she even smiled. Emmett noticed it. That small shift, like a bird testing the wind, after too many winters grounded. He didn't say much, just let the silence hold them both. But in the back of his mind, he knew peace in the West was a thing borrowed, never owned. And then, one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the pines, someone knocked on the cabin door. Not a hard knock, not loud, just deliberate. Clara froze, coffee cup halfway to her lips. Emmett stood slowly, his hand instinctively brushing the grip of the revolver at his side. He moved to the door, opened it half an inch. Silas, hat in hand, smiled like a preacher. Before the lie, evening, he said. Figured I'd pay my respects. Emmett didn't move. You weren't invited. Silas chuckled. Thought I'd be neighborly. Word in town is you've taken a bride. Thought I might congratulate the happy couple. Behind Emmett, Clara had stepped into the doorway, arms folded, eyes burning. What do you want? She said coldly. Silas tipped his hat. Ever the showman. You never did know how to say thank you, Clara. You run off cause a storm. And this poor man gets caught in the middle. She doesn't owe you anything, Emmett said, voice like cold stone. But Silas wasn't here for a fight. Not yet. Truth is, he said, I came to offer a deal. Clara turns herself in. Comes with me, quiet. You get to keep your little ranch and your name untarnished. No trouble. No law. She didn't break the law, Emmett said. Silas tilted his head. Depends on who's telling the story, don't it? For a moment, no one spoke. The wind moved through the pine needles like whispers in a church. Then Clara stepped forward. You don't care about justice, she said. You just want to break something because your brother couldn't. Silas's jaw tightened. My brother's name mattered in our town. You turned it into a curse. He was a curse, she snapped. And I'm done running from ghosts. Silas stared at her, and what showed in his face wasn't rage. It was something cold as certainty. He reached into his coat pocket slowly, pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Got a marshal's signature here, he said. You're wanted in 3 counties now. 1 word from me, and they'll come knocking. Emmett stepped between them. You come back here again. Bring a badge if you want. But don't come alone. Silas smiled thin. I won't. Then he turned, walked back into the dusk, whistling a tune that felt like the end of something. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled. Clara leaned against the table, her hands trembling now. You think he'll come back? Emmett nodded once. Men like him don't bluff. So what now? He looked at her, quiet for a long time. Then finally said, now we stop waiting for the storm. And just like that, the spell of stillness was broken. They weren't hiding anymore. They were preparing. Not for revenge, but for the right to keep what they'd found. Eva had to defend something. You barely just found, but knew you couldn't lose. Drop your thoughts in the comments. The night after Silas left, neither of them slept. The fire burned low, and outside the cold crept in under the windowsills. But inside, Clara sat at the table, hands wrapped around a cup gone cold, eyes distant. Emmett was sharpening a knife by the hearth, not because he needed to, but because it gave his hands something to do. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said, her voice quiet, "protecting me. It's not your fight." Emmett didn't look up. "It is now. But you barely know me." He stopped, set the knife down gently. "I know what kind of woman stays when she could run. I know what kind of woman folds laundry she didn't make and stirs stew for a man she don't owe anything to." She looked at him then, eyes soft but full of storm. "That doesn't make me innocent. I'm not looking for innocent," he said. "I'm looking for true." That sat between them for a long while. Then she stood, walked to the shelf, where he kept a spare inkwell and torn paper, sat down and began writing. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm not letting him tell my story anymore," she said. "I'll send this to the marshal myself. Let the law read my words, not his lies." Emmett frowned. "You sure? That could bring trouble faster than we're ready for." "I'm tired of hiding," she said, the pen trembling in her hand. "And if I go down, I want it to be with my name spelled right." He watched her for a moment, then reached for his coat. "I'll ride it into town. Safer that way." She hesitated. "Why are you doing this, Emmett?" He looked at her, the lamplight softening the lines of his tired face. "Because I've lived with regret," he said. "And I'm not letting you carry it alone." By morning, the letter was folded and sealed. Emmett rode out just before the sun rose, the sky painted in bruised purples and gold. Clara stood on the porch, arms crossed, lips pressed tight, watching him disappear into the dust and wind. She didn't cry, she just stood there, like a woman who had decided finally that she would rather face the world standing than survive it crawling. When he returned that evening, his face was unreadable. "They'll look into it," he said, handing her back the empty satchel. "Marshall said the papers were messy on your case. A few witnesses never showed. Stories got holes in it." Her voice cracked. "That means I have a chance." Emmett nodded. "More than you did yesterday." Clara sank onto the porch rail, exhaling like she hadn't breathed in weeks. Then, almost afraid to ask, she said, "Do you think, if they believe me, I'll be free?" Emmett sat beside her. "You already are," he said softly. "You just ain't felt it yet." And in that moment, under the open sky and the quiet hum of prairie wind, she believed him. Not because the danger was over, but because, for once, someone had looked at her and seen more than the worst thing she'd ever done. It was a gray morning. When the rider came, the sky hung low, thick with unfallen snow, and the wind had that stillness to it, the kind that warned of a change in the air. Emmett was splitting wood when he saw the figure approaching from the east trail. Not fast, not in a hurry, just steady, like a man with nothing to prove. Clara stood in the doorway, her hand curled around the frame. Her eyes narrowed as the rider got closer. It wasn't Silas. This man wore a long brown coat, dusty from the road. His beard was neat, but his eyes were tired. Tied to his saddlebag was a worn leather binder and a tin star. A marshal. He dismounted without a word, tied his horse to the post, and tipped his hat politely. "Name's Hartwell," he said. "Federal Marshal Auta Wicheta. I got a letter. Said to come hear a story." Emmett stepped forward. "That letter came from this house. From Clara." Marshal Hartwell turned toward her. "That you, miss?" She nodded. Her voice caught before she could get it out. "Yes. Mind if I come in? I don't aim to arrest no one. I just read things better by a fire." Inside, they sat at the table. Clara poured him coffee with shaking hands, and Emmett kept near, watching like a man guarding more than a cabin. Hartwell opened the leather binder, flipping through notes. Then he looked up at Clara, his voice even. "I ain't here to make this harder. But you should know your husband's brother, Silas, sent his own letter. Claimed you fled after attacking Thomas. Claimed Emmett here married you to hide the truth." Clara looked down. "I expected that. But I also talked to a woman in Baxter Creek," the marshal continued. "Said she took you in once. Gave you a place to sleep when you had not but bruises and a name too dangerous to carry. She remembered the way you cried in your sleep. Said you'd murmur your sister's name." Clara's eyes welled up. "Her name was Lily." Hartwell nodded slowly. "I also found the original trial notes. Your husband paid off the town judge, who later got removed for other misconduct. A few witnesses were never followed up on, and your injuries. They were documented at the clinic." He closed the binder. Sometimes justice takes the long way round. But I believe you. Clara's breath caught in her throat. So, what happens now? Hartwell leaned forward. You want to press formal charges? We can reopen the case. But I'll be honest, it might drag on. Get ugly. And Silas, he'll try to paint you as the villain. Clara looked at Emmett, who gave no signal, just calm eyes. Letting her decide, she turned back to the marshal. Double quotes, no. I don't want a courtroom. I don't want revenge. She paused. I just want my name cleared. I want to live without hiding. Hartwell smiled faintly. I figured you might say that. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, folded paper. Set it gently on the table. It's a statement. Says you've been reviewed and found no longer wanted for questioning. You're off the books. Clara stared at the paper, then slowly picked it up with trembling fingers. She held it to her chest, like something sacred. Thank you, she whispered. Hartwell stood, stretched his back, and pulled his hat back on. Sometimes the good folks are the ones too tired to scream, he said. But you didn't quit. That counts for something. He tipped his hat again, nodded at Emmett, and walked out without another word. They watched him ride away until he disappeared into the low fog dot inside the cabin. Clara sat at the table for a long while, the letter still pressed to her heart. Then she looked at Emmett. You didn't ask me to stay when this was over. I didn't have to, he said. You're not someone who needs asking. You're someone worth waiting on. She smiled, slow and warm. For the first time, she believed her story didn't have to end in flight. It could end in roots. After the marshal left, the snow came. Not a storm, but a slow, steady fall that blanketed the land like a secret being kept. The kind of snow that muffled sound and thought, that made even a hard land look soft for a while. Clara stood by the window, holding the letter that set her free. But it wasn't the paper that made her breath catch. It was what freedom meant now. She turned to Emmett, who was stacking fresh logs near the hearth. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked gently. Emmett paused, looked out the window like he was reading something in the trees. Used to, he said. Before the war. Before my brother died. Thought maybe I'd head south. See the ocean. Maybe start over where nobody knew my name. And now, he met her gaze. His voice was quiet but sure. Now it's not about where I go. It's about who's there. Clara looked away, her heart beating loud in her chest. She hadn't meant to stay. Hadn't meant to get used to the way he always made 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. The way his boots always ended up by the door next to hers, like they belonged, in pairs. The way he said her name like it didn't come with weight or history, just grace. She was still learning how to believe in things like that. Later that evening, they sat at the table for supper, just the two of them. As always, Emmett had made rabbit stew. Clara lit the lanterns. They ate in comfortable silence, until she finally spoke. I've been thinking about the deal we made. Emmett looked up. You want out? He asked, voice unreadable. No, she said quickly. I want in. She looked at him, eyes clear. I want to take your name. Not just on paper. I want it for real. Not because I need it, but because I choose it. He blinked slowly, like the words took a moment to settle. I already gave it to you, he said softly. She smiled. But now I'm giving you something back. She stood up, walked around the table, and placed her hand on his shoulder. Want to stay, if you'll still have me. He looked up at her, this woman, who came to him like a storm, who now stood like still water, and his hand found hers. I was never planning on letting you go, he whispered. And just like that, something unspoken between them turned solid, like the ground freezing underfoot after too many seasons of mud. That night, she didn't sleep, curled in a ball, waiting for sounds in the dark. She lay beside Emmett, her hand resting gently on his chest, her breath steady. He didn't speak, just let his arm wrap around her, like he'd always known she'd end up there. Outside, the wind moved the snow in small swirls. Inside, the fire burned slow and warm, and for the first time, when she looked around that cabin, she didn't feel like a guest in borrowed walls. She felt home. It was nearly spring when the second letter came. Not from the law, not from a neighbor, but from a dusty envelope left in the bottom of Emmett's old trunk. One he hadn't touched since the day Clara moved in. She found it while searching for a quilt. Just an old folded paper with a name she hadn't seen in a long time. Thomas Garrett, her husband. The man she'd escaped. The man she thought was long gone from her. Story. She shouldn't have opened it. But curiosity has a way of pulling even the strongest heart toward old wounds. The letter was addressed to Emmett. It was written in careful slanted script, like the writer wanted every word to land sharp. Brother, you're a fool to think marrying her will make you her savior. She's poison. I've seen it. The kind that kills you slow, smiling all the while. You take her in, she'll turn your name to ash like she did mine. Don't say I didn't warn you. Clara stared at the page like it had teeth. She didn't cry, but something in her chest curled tight. That a man could write such things after all she'd endured. That Emmett had read it and still chosen her. She placed the letter on the table, silent, waiting. When Emmett came in from the barn, snow on his shoulders and hands raw from rope, he saw it there. He froze, not angry, just quiet. You weren't meant to see that, he said. I know, she whispered, but I did. She turned to him, tears now spilling freely. Did you believe it? Any of it? Emmett took off his hat, laid it down slow. I read that letter the morning you first knocked on my door. Clara blinked. You what? I almost turned you away, he admitted. Because I was tired. Because trusting again was like asking to get burned. And my brother's voice still echoed loud. He looked at her, eyes full of something, heavy and real. But then you stood there with snow in your hair and fear in your bones. And you didn't ask for pity. You just asked for time. And I saw something in you that he never did. What? A woman who wanted to live better, not just run faster. Clara's breath shook, I thought. If you read that, you'd see me like he did. I saw you, Emmett said, stepping close. Not the version they made of you, the real one. He reached out, took her hands in his. You're not the things he called you. You're the reason I can finally hear quiet again. That broke something in her. A dam she didn't know still held. She buried her face in his chest. And he wrapped his arms around her like he'd been waiting to. The letter stayed on the table, but it lost its power. Words are just ink. After all end, till someone chooses to believe them. And Emmett, he believed in her. Later that night, she asked softly, why didn't you throw it away? He looked at the fire, eyes distant. Because it reminded me what it feels like to listen to the wrong voice. He turned back to her. And every day since, I've chosen yours. It began with a single row of carrots. Clara didn't say anything the morning she turned over that patch of earth behind the cabin, just rolled up her sleeves, pulled her hair back, and let her hands break open the cold spring soil. Emmett watched her from the porch, sipping coffee, didn't ask why. Because some things don't need a reason. Some things just grow where the ground is finally soft enough. They never planned the garden. One day it was carrots. A week later, Clara tucked wild herbs along the fence line. Then came tomatoes, squash, beans, climbing up hand-tied stakes. Emmett carved a small path of flat stones so she wouldn't get mud on her skirts. And when summer came, it bloomed like it had always been meant to. They didn't talk much about the past anymore. Not because it was forgotten, but because it had finally settled. Like dust after a long ride. Some days, Clara would find Emmett reading by the fire, a dog curled at his feet. Some evenings, she'd sing while hanging laundry. Her voice gentle like wind brushing through cotton. They still had hard days. The roof leaked in August. Emmett's back acted up whenever he cut wood to long dot. Clara had nightmares some nights, waking with a gasp that made him reach for her hand before she could even speak. But none of it broke them, because healing wasn't a miracle. It was a rhythm, a choice made every morning to stay, to tend, to believe in something that couldn't be measured but could be felt in the quiet between words. One Sunday afternoon, a small wagon pulled up the trail. It was a boy, no more than 10, eyes cautious, hat too big. He carried a note from the preacher down in town. His parents had died of fever. No kin nearby. The preacher had done what he could, but the boy didn't speak, didn't eat much. They thought maybe someone quiet like Emmett, someone kind like Clara, might be the right place for him to land. Clara knelt beside the boy, eye to eye. You like gardens? She asked softly. The boy didn't answer, but his eyes flicked toward the green rows behind the cabin. She offered him a piece of bread. He took it slowly, chewing like he wasn't sure he was allowed. They didn't press him. They just let him sit on the steps while the wind rustled the corn stalks and bees hummed around the flowers Clara had planted near the window. By dusk, he was asleep on the porch, curled like something safe. They never sent him back, didn't ask the preacher for anything official, didn't sign papers, just gave him a bed, a name to call them by when he was ready, and a garden to watch things grow. Years later, folks in town said Emmett and Clara must have always wanted a child, that fate had brought him there. But truth was, they hadn't gone looking for a child. They'd just made room. And in that room, quiet, steady, full of soil and forgiveness, something sacred bloomed. Sometimes love doesn't arrive loud or sudden, shows up as a quiet space made for someone else to heal. If this story meant something to you, let me know in the comments. And if you're still waiting for your own peace, your own place, stay with me. More stories are coming. And maybe, just maybe, one of them will feel like home.